The night before her wedding, Clara Whitmore made a discovery that would destroy everything, but it wasn't the betrayal that broke her. It was realizing she'd been raised to accept it. Standing in the shadows of her family's London garden, she heard her fiancé's voice mingling with her cousin's laughter, their words casual, intimate, discussing her like livestock at auction. The Duke needed her fortune. Her cousin wanted his title. And Clara? She was simply the transaction that made it all possible. But here's the thing about cages. You don't know you're in one until you find the door. Stay with me until the end to see how one woman's refusal to be sold changed everything. Drop a like and comment which city you're watching from. The morning fog clung to London like a wet blanket, thick enough to muffle the clatter of carriages on cobblestone. Clara stood at her bedroom window, watching it roll through Grosvenor Square, swallowing the gaslight halos one by one. Her wedding dress hung on the wardrobe door behind her. Ivory silk, French lace, seed pearls stitched in patterns that had taken 3 seamstresses 6 weeks to complete. Beautiful. Expensive. Suffocating. 24 hours. That's all she had left. Miss Clara? Her maid's voice came soft from the doorway. Your mother's asking for you. The florist needs final approval on the arrangements. Clara didn't turn around. Tell her I approve whatever she's chosen. She specifically wanted your... Then tell her I specifically don't care. The maid's footsteps retreated quickly. Clara closed her eyes. That was cruel. None of this was Mary's fault. But cruelty seemed to be the only language that worked lately, the only way to create even the smallest buffer between herself and the inevitable. She'd been raised for this. Groomed, really, like a show horse being prepared for auction. Posture lessons at 6, French and Italian by 8, piano, watercolors, the correct way to pour tea. All of it designed to make her desirable to men who would never actually desire her. They wanted the package, the bloodline, the dowry her father had spent 3 generations accumulating. The Duke of Ashford wanted all 3. Clara had met him exactly 4 times before their engagement. Formal visits, always chaperoned, conversations so scripted they could have been written by her mother's secretary. He was handsome enough, dark hair going silver at the temples, tall, broad-shouldered in that way that suggested physical activity beyond sitting in Parliament. He had good teeth. Her mother had pointed that out specifically, as if Clara were buying a horse. He's from one of the finest families in England, her mother had said, as though that settled everything. And he's chosen you, Clara. Do you understand what an honor that is? An honor. That's what they called it when a man twice your age decided your bank account would solve his estate's financial problems. But Clara had accepted, because that's what daughters did. Especially daughters with 3 younger sisters who would need advantageous marriages of their own. Her compliance paved their way. Her sacrifice ensured their futures. It's not a sacrifice if you never wanted anything else, her mother had said once, and maybe she was right. Clara had never allowed herself to want anything else. What would be the point? A knock at the door, sharper this time. Her mother didn't wait for permission. Lady Margaret Whitmore entered like a general surveying a battlefield. Her morning dress impeccable despite the early hour, her hair already arranged with military precision. She took one look at Clara, still in her dressing gown, hair loose, face bare, and her expression tightened. You're not dressed. It's 7 in the morning. It's the day before your wedding. The house is full of preparations. You should be supervising. I thought that's what you were doing. Her mother's jaw clenched. They'd been having the same argument in different forms for weeks now. Her mother pushed forward with plans. Clara passively resisted. Neither of them acknowledged what was really happening, that Clara had checked out of her own wedding entirely. The Duke's mother sent a gift, Lady Margaret said, changing tactics. She gestured to a footman who'd been waiting in the hall. He carried a velvet box the size of a bread loaf. Clara opened it mechanically. Inside, nestled in silk, was a necklace that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Diamonds and sapphires arranged in cascading strands, the kind of piece that wasn't meant to be beautiful. It was meant to announce wealth, to mark its wearer as property of a certain class. It's been in the Ashford family for 200 years, her mother said, reverence thick in her voice, worn by duchesses at coronations, and now it's yours. How lovely,
Clara said flatly. Clara. Her mother's voice dropped, taking on that sharp edge that meant the gloves were coming off. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this petulance needs to stop. You are marrying one of the most powerful men in England. You will be a duchess. Your children will be among the highest-ranking peers in the realm. This is everything we've worked toward. Everything you've worked toward. Don't be ungrateful.
Do you know how many girls would kill for this opportunity? Then let one of them have it. The slap came fast, sharp enough to snap Clara's head to the side. They both froze. Her mother had never struck her before, not once in 22 years. Lady Margaret's hand trembled as she lowered it. You will compose yourself, you will dress, and you will come downstairs and fulfill your duties as a bride-to-be with grace and gratitude. Am I understood? Clara's cheek burned. She didn't raise her hand to touch it. Perfectly. Her mother left without another word, taking the necklace with her. Clara stood there for a long moment, watching fog press against the window like something trying to get in, or maybe like something trying to get out. She made it until late afternoon before the house became unbearable. Her mother had invited half of London society for a pre-wedding tea, and the drawing room was thick with women in silk and suffocating perfume, all of them performing the same careful dance, saying congratulations while their eyes calculated every detail, measuring Clara's triumph against their own daughter's prospects. Such a handsome man, Mrs. Pemberton cooed, her daughter Alice sulking beside her, and so distinguished. You must be beside yourself with joy. Absolutely beside myself, Clara agreed, her smile feeling like it might crack her face. I hear the ceremony will be at St. George's. How divine. Alice, doesn't Clara look radiant? Alice, who'd been pursuing the Duke herself last season, looked like she'd rather eat glass than agree. Radiant, she managed. Clara excused herself as soon as she could, slipping through the French doors into the garden. The air outside was cold enough to bite, but she welcomed it. Anything to clear the cloying sweetness of the drawing room from her lungs. The Whitmore garden was expansive, designed in the formal style. Geometric hedges, gravel paths, marble statuary positioned at precise intervals. Clara had played here as a child, before she'd learned that gardens were for strolling decoratively, not for actually enjoying. She walked without thinking, letting her feet carry her toward the far end where the hedges grew taller, creating private alcoves. She'd had her first kiss here, stolen by a baronet's son, when she was 16. It had been disappointing, wet and awkward, and nothing like the novels suggested. She'd never told anyone. Voices stopped her. Two people were in the alcove ahead, hidden by the towering hedge walls. Clara almost turned back, some couple stealing a moment of privacy probably, but something about the timbre of one voice made her freeze. That was the Duke's laugh. What was he doing here? They weren't supposed to see each other until tomorrow. Bad luck, her mother had said, though Clara suspected it was more about maintaining mystery, keeping the merchandise appealing until the transaction was complete. She should announce herself, step forward, interrupt politely, pretend she hadn't heard anything. But she didn't. You're terrible, see, a woman's voice said, breathless with laughter. What if someone sees? Let them see. I'm past caring. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll be ruined. Ruined? Darling, you're my cousin. We're allowed to speak. Claire's blood went cold. That voice. She knew that voice. Slowly, carefully, she moved closer to the hedge, finding a gap in the branches. Through it, she could just make out two figures on the stone bench. The Duke of Ashford, her fiancé, had his arm around a woman in a green dress. Beatrice. Her cousin Beatrice. Speaking isn't what I'm worried about, Beatrice murmured, and Clara watched her lean into him, her head on his shoulder in a way that was anything but cousinly. Tomorrow, it's done, the Duke said, and there was something ugly in his voice now, something that made Clara's skin crawl. The Whitmore fortune will shore up Ashford's debts, and we can finally stop pretending. You make it sound so mercenary. It is mercenary. That's the entire point. He shifted, tilting Beatrice's face up to his. I'm marrying her for money. You knew that from the start. I know. It's just, she's so oblivious. Like a lamb going to slaughter. She's been trained to be oblivious. They all are. Raise them to believe marriage is about duty and dynasty, and they'll walk into any cage you open. Beatrice laughed softly. Poor Clara. She probably thinks you're actually in love with her.
God, no.
Have you tried having a conversation with her? It's like talking to a particularly well-dressed piece of furniture. The Duke stood, pulling Beatrice up with him. But her father's steel investments are worth a fortune, and she comes with enough land in Yorkshire to fix Ashford's cash flow for a generation. That's all that matters. And after tomorrow? After tomorrow, she'll be too busy being a duchess to notice where I spend my time. He kissed Beatrice then, long and deep, one hand tangled in her hair. Or who I spend it with. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She stood frozen behind the hedge, watching her fiancé kiss her cousin, listening to them discuss her like she was livestock being purchased at market. We should go back, Beatrice said eventually, pulling away. Before we're missed. Let them miss us. What are they going to do, call off the wedding? Your bride might, if she knew. Clara? She'd never. She's too well trained, too obedient. The Duke offered his arm, and Beatrice took it. That's what makes her perfect. They walked away laughing, disappearing into the fog. Clara stayed where she was, gravel digging into her knees. When had she knelt? She didn't remember kneeling. Her mind felt very far away, watching all of this happen to someone else, because surely this wasn't happening to her. Surely she hadn't just discovered that her entire life was a transaction, her marriage a business deal, her fiancé in love with her own cousin. Surely the last 22 years of grooming and preparation and sacrifice hadn't been leading to this. Being sold to a man who found her boring, who planned to use her fortune while keeping his real affections elsewhere. Surely she hadn't been that stupid. But she had. She absolutely had. The fog pressed closer, cold and damp, and somewhere in its depths, Clara heard something crack. Not outside. Inside. Something fundamental and load-bearing, some central support beam of the person she'd been. And when it gave way, everything else started to collapse. She made it back to her room somehow, though she had no memory of the walk. Mary found her there an hour later, still in her outdoor clothes, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed. Miss Clara, are you ill? Should I fetch your mother? No. The word came out hoarse. Don't fetch anyone. But I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask why. Mary's eyes widened, but she nodded slowly. What do you need? Pack a bag. Not a trunk, something I can carry myself. Simple clothes, nothing fancy, and money. Whatever household money you can access without raising suspicion. Miss Clara, what? You said you wouldn't ask. Mary's throat worked. Are you running away? Clara looked up at her. This woman who'd been with her since childhood, who'd braided her hair and mended her dresses and never once judged her for anything. She deserved the truth. I don't know yet, Clara said honestly, but I need to have the option. For a long moment, Mary just stared at her. Then she nodded. I'll do it. But Miss Clara, wherever you're thinking of going, whatever you're planning, be careful. The world out there, it's not kind to women on their own. I know. Do you? Because begging your pardon, miss, but you've been sheltered your whole life. You don't know what it's like to have nothing, to have no one to protect you. Maybe not, Clara said quietly, but I know what it's like to have everything and still feel like I'm drowning. Mary's expression softened. I'll get your things, but please, please think about this. Once you step outside that door, once you walk away from tomorrow, there's no coming back from it. I know that too. After Mary left, Clara stood and walked to the window again. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the familiar shapes of Grosvenor Square, the iron railings, the gas lamps, the orderly rows of townhouses that all looked exactly alike. This was supposed to be her future. Endless identical days and endless identical houses, hosting endless identical parties, performing the same careful dance her mother had perfected. And for what? To be useful? To be ornamental? To make her father's investments worth more and her husband's debts worth less? She thought about the Duke's voice, like talking to a particularly well-dressed piece of furniture. She thought about Beatrice's laugh, poor Clara. She thought about her mother's slap, the sting of it still faint on her cheek. And she thought about the girl she'd been at 6 years old, running wild through this very garden before anyone had taught her that wildness was unbecoming. Before she'd learned to make herself small and quiet and perfect. That girl was still in there somewhere. Clara could feel her, buried under layers of etiquette and expectation, banging against the walls of the cage they'd built around her. You don't know you're in one until you find the door.
Well, she'd found it. The question was whether she had the courage to walk through.
Dinner that night was a special affair. Just family, her mother said, though just family meant 14 people arranged by rank around a table long enough to seat 30. The Duke sat at the head, playing Lord of the Manor already, and Clara's father beamed at him with the satisfaction of a man who'd made an excellent investment. To tomorrow, the Duke said, raising his glass. Everyone echoed him, crystal clinking. Clara raised her glass, drank, said nothing. Beatrice sat 3 seats down, demure and pale blue, and every time Clara looked at her, she felt something dark and hot coil in her stomach. Her cousin met her eyes once and smiled, sweet, guileless, the same smile she'd had since childhood. Clara smiled back. The Duke dominated conversation, discussing politics with her father and uncles, his voice confident and commanding. He had a beautiful voice, actually, rich and warm, the kind that made you want to listen even when he wasn't saying anything particularly interesting. He'd probably used that voice on Beatrice, probably whispered things that made her blush and laugh and fall into his arms. Clara, her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. The Duke asked you a question. Everyone was looking at her. Forgive me, Clara said smoothly. I was distracted by how lovely Beatrice looks this evening. That color suits you beautifully, cousin. Beatrice's smile faltered slightly. Thank you. You must tell me where you got that dress. I'd love something similar for my trousseau. I don't remember, actually. Shame. Clara turned to the Duke, her expression perfectly pleasant. You were saying... He studied her with new interest, as if seeing her for the first time. I was asking about your thoughts on the Yorkshire property. Your father mentioned you spent summers there as a child. Oh yes, beautiful country. All those lovely investments. She paused, letting the word land. I mean landscapes, all those lovely landscapes. Her father frowned slightly. Her mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The Duke's expression didn't change. Indeed, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm sure you are. It must be such a relief having all those debts. She caught herself, eyes wide. Oh, I'm so sorry. I meant all those departments to manage. Running an estate is such complex work. Dead silence around the table. Then the Duke laughed, loud and genuine. Quite right. Very complex indeed. You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Miss Whitmore. More perceptive than I gave you credit for. Because he'd given her no credit at all. Because he thought she was furniture. I try, Clara said sweetly, and took another sip of wine. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Clara played her part perfectly, gracious, demure, every inch the blushing bride. But inside, that girl who used to run wild was screaming, battering against her ribs, demanding to be let out. When the men retired for cigars and the women retreated to the drawing room, Beatrice cornered her near the piano. Are you all right? You seem different tonight. Do I? Clara kept her voice light. I suppose I'm just nervous. Tomorrow's such a big day. The biggest. Beatrice's hand found hers, squeezed gently. I know this must be overwhelming, but you're doing the right thing. The Duke is a good man. You'll be very happy. The sheer audacity of it took Clara's breath away. Beatrice stood there, holding her hand lying directly to her face about the man she was sleeping with, and she looked so sincere, so convinced of her own goodness. Will I? Clara asked quietly. Of course. Why wouldn't you be? No reason. Clara pulled her hand back. I should go. Big day tomorrow, like you said. She left before Beatrice could respond, climbing the stairs to her room where Mary was waiting, a carpet bag packed and hidden in the wardrobe. It's all there, Mary whispered. Clothes, money, even some food. Miss Clara, are you really... I don't know. Clara pressed her hands to her face. I keep thinking I should just go through with it. Like you said, once I leave, there's no coming back. I'll be ruined. My family will be humiliated. My sister's prospects will be destroyed. That's not your fault, isn't it? I'm choosing this. No, Mary said firmly. He chose this when he decided to marry you for money while loving someone else. Your mother chose this when she raised you to be sold. They made these choices. You're just refusing to pay for them.
Clara looked at her maid, really looked at her. When did you get so wise? I've been watching you suffocate for 22 years, miss. I'm just glad you finally noticed the cage. Through the window, Clara could see the garden, dark and foggy. Somewhere out there in London, beyond the gas lamps and iron railings and ordered streets, was a world she'd never been allowed to see. A world without scripts or expectations, without careful dances and performance. A world where she might actually be able to breathe. The Duke's voice echoed in her memory. She's too well trained, too obedient. Her mother's words, "This is everything we've worked toward." Beatrice's laugh, "Poor Clara." And underneath it all, that girl from the garden, still screaming to be free. Clara turned to Mary. "There's someone I need to see, someone who might help." "Who?" "Adrian Hale." Mary's eyes widened. "The Earl? But people say he's strange, unconventional, doesn't follow the rules." Clara smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd managed in weeks. Exactly. She'd met Adrian Hale exactly once, at a garden party 2 summers ago. While everyone else had clustered in safe social groups, performing the usual rituals, he'd been alone by the roses, sketching something in a leather journal. She'd been curious enough to approach, and they'd spent an hour talking about everything except what they were supposed to talk about. Books, ideas, the suffocating absurdity of their world. Her mother had pulled her away eventually, whispered that the Earl was eccentric and not suitable company, which had only made him more interesting. He lived outside London now, on some remote coastal property where he could avoid society entirely. People called him mad, reclusive, probably a dozen other things, which meant he was exactly the kind of person who might help a woman escape the night before her wedding. "Miss Clara," Mary said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" Clara looked at the carpet bag, then at the window, then at her own reflection in the dark glass. A woman in an expensive dress, wearing an expensive face, living an expensive lie. "I'm planning to find out who I am when I'm not being what everyone else needs me to be." She'd spent her entire life being perfect, being obedient, being exactly what they'd trained her to be. Tomorrow was supposed to be the culmination of all that work, her reward for 22 years of compliance. But standing there in her room with a packed bag and a plan taking shape, and that wild girl finally breaking free, Clara realized something fundamental. She didn't want the reward. She wanted her life back, and she was done asking permission. Clara left at 3 in the morning when even the servants were asleep. She'd waited in her room for hours, listening to the house settle into silence. The last murmur of voices fading, footsteps retreating down hallways, doors clicking shut. Her wedding dress still hung on the wardrobe like a ghost, pale and accusatory in the darkness. She didn't look at it as she changed into the plain wool traveling clothes Mary had packed. The carpet bag felt heavier than it should. Everything she was taking could fit in one small bag, but it contained her entire future now, what little of it she could carry. Mary met her at the servants' entrance, pressing a folded paper into her hands. "The Earl's address. It's 2 days' travel north along the coast. There's a coaching inn at Whitby where you can rest." Her voice cracked. "Please be careful." "I will. And if you change your mind, I won't." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "What should I tell them? In the morning, when they find you gone?" Clara had thought about this. There was no version of this story that didn't end in scandal, no way to soften the blow for her family. But she could at least try to minimize the damage. "Tell them I left a letter, that I couldn't go through with the marriage. Don't mention Adrian Hale. Don't mention anything except that I needed to leave." She squeezed Mary's hand. "And tell my sisters, tell them I'm sorry. They'll understand eventually. They're not stupid, Miss Clara. They've seen how miserable you've been." "Maybe." Clara adjusted the bag's strap on her shoulder. "But understanding and forgiving are different things." The streets of London at 3 in the morning were a different world. The fog had thickened into something almost solid, muffling sound and turning familiar landmarks into hulking shadows. Clara kept to the edges of buildings, her heart hammering so hard she was certain anyone nearby could hear it. She'd never been out alone at night. Never been out alone, period, not really. There had always been someone, a maid, a chaperone, a family member, standing between her and the world.
Now there was just fog and darkness and the echo of her own footsteps.
A man stumbled out of an alley ahead, drunk and singing off-key. Clara froze, pressing herself against a doorway. He weaved past without seeing her, his voice fading into the mist. She waited until her breathing steadied before moving again. The coaching station was on the edge of the city, a sprawling yard full of horses and vehicles preparing for early morning departures. Clara had never bought her own coach ticket. She'd never needed to. But she'd watched it done enough times to know the basics. The ticketmaster barely looked at her. "Where to?" "Whitby." "That's a 2-day journey.
"You'll need to change coaches at York." He named a price that made her stomach drop, nearly half of what Mary had managed to scrape together. But she paid it without arguing. What else was she going to do? The coach was already half full when she climbed in. A merchant's wife with 2 small children, an older man who smelled like tobacco, and a young couple who couldn't stop touching each other. Nobody paid Clara any attention, which was exactly what she needed. As the coach lurched forward, leaving London behind, Clara pressed her face to the window and watched the city disappear into fog. No turning back now. The journey north was nothing like the comfortable family trip she'd taken in private carriages. The public coach was cramped and cold, the roads rutted enough to rattle her teeth, and every stop brought new passengers who eyed her with varying degrees of suspicion or indifference. By the second day, Clara's entire body ached. Her back hurt from the hard bench. Her head throbbed from lack of sleep. The simple dress that had seemed so practical in London now felt thin and inadequate against the coastal wind that cut through the coach's walls. "First time traveling alone?" the merchant's wife asked during one stop. Her children had finally fallen asleep, sprawled across her lap like puppies. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "You keep touching your bag like you're afraid it'll disappear, and you haven't said a word to anyone since London." The woman's expression wasn't unkind. "Running from something or running to something? Does it matter?" "Suppose not. Just be careful up north. It's wilder out there, less forgiving to women on their own." Everyone kept saying that. As if Clara didn't already know she was stepping off the edge of the world, she understood. "I'll be careful," she said, and the woman nodded, satisfied. When they finally reached Whitby, the sun was setting over a harbor full of fishing boats. The town clung to steep cliffs, all narrow streets and salt-weathered buildings that looked like they'd been fighting the sea for centuries. It smelled like fish and tar and something else. Freedom, maybe. Or just desperation. The coaching inn Mary had mentioned was near the harbor, a squat stone building with a faded sign swinging in the wind. Clara paid for a room, another chunk of her dwindling funds, and climbed stairs that creaked under her feet. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand, but it was hers. She locked the door and sat on the bed, still wearing her coat, still clutching her bag. She'd done it. She'd actually left. The reality of that hit her all at once, and suddenly she couldn't breathe. Her chest constricted, her vision blurred, and she bent forward, gasping like she'd been underwater too long. What had she done? What in heaven's name had she done? By now, they would have found her letter. Her mother would be hysterical. Her father would be furious. The Duke. She didn't want to think about the Duke, about the scandal this would cause, about how her sisters would suffer for her choice, about how there was no going back. Clara pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sound of her breathing. She would not cry. She would not fall apart. She'd made this choice. She had to live with it. But it was so much harder than she'd imagined. Eventually, exhaustion won. She fell asleep still dressed, still clutching her bag, and dreamed of wedding dresses that tried to strangle her. Morning brought rain and the realization that she had no idea what to do next. Adrian Hale's estate was another half-day's travel up the coast, but there were no coaches running that route. The innkeeper, a broad woman with suspicious eyes, told her she'd need to hire a cart or walk. Walk? That's 15 miles. Closer to 20, actually, and the coast road's rough. You'd be better off waiting for the weekly supply wagon on Thursday. That's 3 days from now. The woman shrugged. Or you could pay someone to take you, but that'll cost extra. Everything cost extra. Clara was starting to understand how money worked when you didn't have an unlimited supply of it.
Every shilling spent was one she couldn't get back, and she could feel her safety net shrinking with each transaction. She found a fisherman willing to take her north for twice what seemed reasonable, but she paid it anyway. What choice did she have? His cart smelled like the sea and creaked ominously with every bump in the road. He didn't ask questions, which Clara appreciated, though his silence somehow felt more judgmental than conversation would have been. The coastal landscape was unlike anything she'd seen before. Wild and windswept, all rocky cliffs and crashing waves and sky that seemed too big, too open. There were no neat hedgerows here, no carefully manicured gardens, just raw nature, indifferent to human attempts at order. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. "You're headed to the Hale estate?" the fisherman finally asked, his voice rough from years of shouting over wind. "Yes." "Strange place for a lady to be going alone." "I suppose," he grunted. "Earl Hale's a strange man. Keeps to himself mostly. Doesn't come into town much." "I've heard. Folks say he's mad, that he left London because he couldn't stand society." Clara almost laughed. "Maybe he just has good sense." The fisherman shot her a look that suggested he thought she might be mad too, but he didn't say anything else. They reached the estate just as the rain stopped. Clara's first thought was that it didn't look like an estate at all, not in the way she understood estates. There was no grand manor house, no sweeping driveway, no ornamental gardens. Instead, there was a sprawling stone house that looked like it had grown out of the cliffs themselves, all rough edges and practical design. Outbuildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen, and beyond them, fields stretched toward the sea, separated by low stone walls. It looked functional, working, real in a way that London's grand estates never had been. "This is it," the fisherman said, pulling the cart to a stop. "You sure about this?" Clara climbed down, her legs shaky from the journey. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She paid him and watched him drive away, leaving her alone in front of a stranger's house with a carpet bag and rapidly diminishing courage. What if Adrian didn't remember her? What if he turned her away? What if he was exactly as mad as people said? What if she'd run from one cage straight into another? But the door opened before she could decide whether to knock or run. And there he was. Adrian Hale looked older than she remembered, or maybe just more weathered. His dark hair was longer, touched with gray at the temples, and his face had lines that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into the sun. He wore rough work clothes, not the formal attire she'd seen him in at that garden party, and his hands were stained with what looked like ink or paint. He stared at her for a long moment, recognition dawning slowly. "Clara Whitmore." Her carefully prepared speech evaporated. "I didn't know where else to go." His eyebrows rose. "Aren't you supposed to be getting married today?" "I was. Yesterday, actually. I left." "Left?" "Yes." "The night before your wedding?" "Yes." "To the Duke of Ashford?" "Yes." Adrian leaned against the doorframe, and she couldn't read his expression at all. "That's going to cause quite a scandal." "I know." "Your family will be furious." "I know that too." "And you came here because 2 years ago, you told me that society was a prison we'd all agreed to live in, and the only way to escape was to stop agreeing." Clara's voice shook, but she forced herself to keep talking. "Because you're the only person I've ever met who seemed to actually mean it when they questioned everything we're supposed to accept. Because I'm desperate and alone and I have nowhere else to go." The silence stretched long enough that Clara started to regret everything. Then Adrian stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in." Dut. The interior of the house was chaos in the best possible way. Books everywhere, stacked on tables, piled in corners, lying open like someone had gotten distracted mid-read. Paintings in various states of completion leaned against walls. Maps covered one entire surface, marked with notes in cramped handwriting. It looked like someone actually lived here, actually used this space for something other than impressing visitors. Adrian led her through to a sitting room where a fire burned low in the grate. He gestured to a chair, and Clara sank into it gratefully. "Tea," he offered. "Please." He disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She could hear him moving around, the clink of china, the whistle of a kettle. Normal sounds,
comforting sounds. When he returned with a tray, she noticed his hands were steadier than hers had been in days. "So," he said, settling into the chair across from her, "tell me everything." And she did. The whole sordid story spilled out. The overheard conversation, Beatrice's betrayal, the Duke's mercenary calculations, her mother's slap, the suffocating weight of expectations she'd carried her entire life. Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "They wanted to sell me," Clara finished, her voice raw. "And I was going to let them because I didn't know I was allowed to say no." "You're allowed to say no," Adrian said quietly. "You were always allowed to say no. They just made sure you never realized it. So now what? I've run away. I've ruined my family's reputation. I've destroyed my sister's prospects. For what? To be free? What does that even mean?" "It means you get to decide what happens next." "I don't know how to do that. I've never decided anything in my life." Adrian set down his teacup, leaning forward. "Then you'll learn. That's what this is for." "This?" "Freedom. It's not a destination, Clara. It's a skill you develop." She laughed, brittle and broken. "I don't have time to develop skills. I have maybe 50 pounds left and no plan beyond knocking on your door and hoping you wouldn't turn me away." "I won't turn you away." "Why not?" "You don't owe me anything. We met once, 2 years ago, and talked for an hour." "Because 2 years ago I saw someone who was drowning in expectations and trying very hard to pretend she could breathe underwater." Adrian's voice was steady. "And because I know what it's like to walk away from everything you're supposed to be." Clara studied him. "Is that why you left London?" "I left because I was suffocating. Because every day felt like playing a role in a play I hadn't auditioned for and didn't want to be in." He gestured around them. "Here. I can breathe. I can work. I can be useful in ways that actually matter, not just decorative." "People say you're mad." "People say a lot of things. Most of them are afraid of anyone who stops pretending." "And you're not afraid?" "Terrified, actually, but I'd rather be terrified and free than comfortable and caged." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. "What do I do now?" "Right now, you rest. You've been traveling for 2 days and you look like you're about to collapse." Adrian stood. "There's a room upstairs you can use. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." "Just like that?" "Just like that." "You're not going to ask what I can pay you, or how long I'm planning to stay, or—" "Clara." He cut her off gently. "You showed up at my door asking for help. I'm helping. We'll work out the details later." It was the first unconditional kindness anyone had shown her in. She couldn't remember how long. Clara stood on shaking legs. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This life isn't easy. You'll have to work. Actually work, with your hands. Not just supervise servants or arrange flowers. You'll have to learn to do things you've never even thought about. And people will judge you. They'll call you ruined, scandalous, probably insane." "They're already calling me that." "Fair enough." Adrian's mouth quirked. "Welcome to the frontier, Clara Whitmore. It's going to be hell." The room upstairs was simple. A bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the sea. Clara set her bag down and stood there for a moment, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs. She'd done it. She'd actually escaped. But standing there in that small room, with the reality of her situation settling over her like a weight, Clara realized that escape was only the first step. Now she had to figure out how to survive. She unpacked methodically, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe, arranging her meager possessions on the washstand. Everything she owned fit in this tiny space now, her entire life reduced to one room. It should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like possibility. A knock at the door startled her. Adrian stood in the hallway, holding a bundle of clothes. "These belong to my sister," he said, "before she married and moved to Edinburgh. They might fit you better than those traveling clothes." Clara took them, surprised. "You have a sister?" "Had. She died 3 years ago. Childbirth." His voice was flat, carefully neutral. "Her husband didn't want her things, so I kept them. Seemed wasteful to throw them away. I'm sorry. So am I." He turned to leave, then paused. "Clara? What you did leaving like that. It took courage. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After he left, Clara examined the clothes. Simple dresses, practical and well made. She tried one on, surprised when it fit reasonably well. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. No elaborate hair, no expensive jewelry, no careful makeup or practiced expression. Just her, whoever that was. She was still standing there when she heard voices downstairs, multiple voices, raised in what sounded like argument. Clara crept to the landing, listening. Can't be serious, Hale. A woman? Here? Why not here? Because this is a working estate, not some London drawing room. We've got crops to bring in, stock to manage, repairs to make before winter. We don't have time to babysit some runaway aristocrat. That was a man's voice, rough and angry. Nobody's asking you to babysit anyone, Adrian said calmly. Then what exactly is she going to do? Sit around looking decorative while we work ourselves to death? She'll work. Harsh laughter. Work? That woman probably doesn't know which end of a shovel to hold. Then she'll learn. This is insane. You're insane. I told the others you'd gone soft in the head, living out here alone. But this… Enough. Adrian's voice went cold. This is my estate, Thomas. I'll decide who lives here and who works here. If you have a problem with that, there's the door. Silence. You'll regret this, Thomas said finally. Mark my words. That woman's trouble. She'll bring scandal down on all of us. I'll take that risk. Footsteps, then the slam of the front door. Clara stayed on the landing, her heart pounding. So it had already started. The judgment, the rejection, the assumption that she was useless. She'd expected it from London society. She hadn't expected it to follow her here. Adrian appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. You heard that? Hard not to. Thomas is my estate manager. He's good at his job, but he's not particularly diplomatic. He thinks I'm going to be a burden. He thinks anyone who isn't breaking their back every day is a burden. Don't take it personally. But how could she not take it personally? She'd fled one world that saw her as a useless ornament only to land in another that saw her the same way. He's right, you know, Clara said quietly. I don't know which end of a shovel to hold. I don't know how to work. Not really. Then you'll learn. Why do you keep saying that like it's simple? Adrian climbed the stairs until he was standing in front of her. Because it is simple, not easy. Simple. You decide you want to learn something, and then you do it. Over and over, until it stops being impossible and starts being difficult. Then you keep going until difficult becomes manageable. That's all work is. Repetition and stubbornness. I don't know if I have enough stubbornness. You walked away from your wedding the night before it happened. You traveled 2 days alone to knock on a stranger's door. You've got plenty of stubbornness. He smiled slightly. You just haven't had to use it before. Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could learn, could work, could become something other than what she'd been raised to be. But wanting wasn't the same as knowing. Get some rest, Adrian said. Tomorrow starts early here. Pratab. Clara didn't sleep well. The bed was comfortable enough, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, her sister's disappointment, the Duke's contempt. She saw Beatrice laughing. When dawn finally came, gray and cold through the window, Clara dragged herself out of bed and dressed in one of Adrian's sister's dresses. It was heavier than she was used to, made for work rather than appearance. Downstairs, she found Adrian already awake, sitting at a scarred wooden table with papers spread around him. Morning, he said without looking up. There's bread and cheese in the kitchen. Help yourself. Clara found the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive stove, and made herself a simple breakfast. The bread was dense and hearty, nothing like the delicate pastries she was used to. It tasted like earth and salt. She ate it all. When she returned to the main room, Adrian was rolling up his papers. Ready to see the estate? As ready as I'll ever be. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear, the sky enormous overhead. Adrian led her through the grounds, pointing out different areas. The fields where they grew oats and barley, the livestock pens, the orchards that were his sister's legacy, the workshops where they made repairs and built equipment. Workers were already active, and Clara saw how they watched her, some curious, some hostile, all of them skeptical. She couldn't blame them. This is Sarah, Adrian said, introducing her to a woman about Clara's age who was hauling water from a well. She manages the household and coordinates most of the indoor work. Sarah looked Clara up and down, unimpressed. You're the runaway bride. News travels fast. It's a small community. Everyone knows everyone's business. Sarah set down her bucket. Can you cook? No. Clean? I've never had to. So? Preserve food? Tend animals? No, no, and no. Sarah's expression said everything. Then what exactly can you do? Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she do? She could play piano, pour tea, speak French, make polite conversation. All skills designed to make her marriageable, none of them useful in this world. I can read, she said finally, and write, and do mathematics. So you're educated but useless. Wonderful. Sarah, Adrian warned. What? It's true. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but we don't have room for passengers here. Everyone works, everyone contributes. If she can't do that, then she'll learn, Adrian cut in, just like you learned, just like everyone here learned. Sarah's jaw tightened. Fine, but she's your responsibility. If she causes problems, if she can't keep up, if she brings trouble from London, I'll handle it. Sarah grabbed her bucket and stalked away, her disapproval radiating like heat. She seems friendly, Clara said weakly. She's protective. Most of the people here came from difficult situations. They've built something stable, and they're afraid anything could destroy it. Adrian started walking again. You represent the world they escaped from. They don't trust you yet. Will they ever? That depends on you. They reached a barn where several people were working, feeding animals, mucking stalls, hauling hay. The work looked backbreaking, nothing like the gentle horseback riding Clara had done in London's parks. Thomas, the estate manager from last night, was there, directing workers. He saw them, and his face went stony. Hail! Come to show off your pet project? Come to introduce Clara to the work. Right, because that'll go well. Thomas turned to Clara, his expression hard. You ever mucked a stall, Lady Clara? It's just Clara, and no. You ever hauled water, split wood, harvested crops? No. Then what good are you? The question hung in the air, brutal and direct. Clara felt something shift inside her, that same defiance that had pushed her out of London. I guess we'll find out. Thomas laughed. You'll last a week, maybe less. First time your hands blister, first time your back aches, first time you realize how hard this actually is, you'll run back to your fancy life. There's nothing to run back to. There's always something to run back to. People like you think you want freedom, but what you really want is an adventure you can quit when it stops being fun. He stepped closer, and Clara fought the urge to retreat. This isn't an adventure. This is survival, and you're not equipped for it. Maybe not, but I'm here anyway. Something flickered in Thomas's expression. Not respect, not yet, but maybe the smallest acknowledgement that she hadn't immediately collapsed. Fine. You want to work? Start with the chickens, feed them, collect eggs, clean the coop. Simple enough even for you. He turned away, dismissing her. Sarah will show you how. Adrian touched Clara's shoulder. You don't have to, Yes, I do. Clara straightened her spine. Where are the chickens? Chickens, it turned out, were vicious. Sarah showed her once how to scatter feed, how to reach under hens for eggs without getting pecked, how to rake out soiled bedding. Then she left Clara to it. The first hour was humiliating. The hens seemed to sense her incompetence, squawking and flapping whenever she came near. She got pecked 3 times trying to collect eggs, and when she tried to rake the bedding, she somehow managed to knock over the water trough, flooding half the coop. By midday, Clara's hands were raw, her dress was filthy, and she'd collected exactly 11 eggs, 6 of which she'd accidentally broken. She wanted to cry. She wanted to give up. She wanted to prove Thomas right and run back to London begging for forgiveness. But she didn't. Instead, she kept working. By evening, she'd managed to complete the basic tasks Sarah had assigned. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, and she smelled like chicken droppings. But the work was done. Sarah inspected it with a critical eye. Could be worse. Could be better. You'll do it again tomorrow. I assumed as much. And the day after that. until you stop being terrible at it. Clara nodded, too tired to argue. That night, she fell asleep before dark, her body screaming from exertion. But as she drifted off, she felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Small and fragile, but real. She'd worked. She'd contributed. She'd survived her first day. Tomorrow might break her, but tonight she'd made it, and that was enough. 3 days later, a messenger arrived from London. Clara was in the chicken coop when Sarah came to get her, her expression grim. "There's someone here for you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Says he's representing your father." The walk back to the house felt like a march to execution. Her father had found her. Of course he had. She'd been naive to think she could disappear completely. The messenger waited in Adrian's sitting room, looking out of place among the books and chaos. He was young, nervous, dressed in the Whitmore family livery. He bowed slightly when Clara entered. "Miss Whitmore, what do you want?" "I have a letter from your father." He held out an envelope, sealed with wax. Clara took it with hands that shook. The seal bore her family crest, the same crest that should have been on her wedding invitations. She broke the seal and read. The letter was brief, written in her father's precise hand. "Clara, you have disgraced this family beyond repair. The Duke has demanded financial compensation for the humiliation you caused. Your sister's prospects are destroyed. Your mother is ill from the shock. If you have any decency remaining, you will return immediately and beg the Duke's forgiveness. He may still be persuaded to proceed with the marriage if you grovel sufficiently. If you refuse, you are no longer a daughter of mine. Your name will be stricken from the family. You will receive nothing, no dowry, no inheritance, no support of any kind. Choose wisely. This is your final opportunity. Lord Whitmore." Clara read it twice, the words blurring. Then she folded it carefully and looked at the messenger. "Tell my father I've made my choice." "Miss Clara, please, he's very serious. If you don't return, I understand what I'm giving up." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Tell him I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. But I won't marry the Duke. Not for money. Not for family honor. Not for anything." The messenger's face crumpled with distress. "He'll disown you." "I know. You'll have nothing. I know that too." He left, taking her father's ultimatum and her final rejection with him. Adrian appeared in the doorway after he'd gone. "You all right?" "No." Clara sank into a chair, the letter still clutched in her hand. "But I will be." "Your father's serious about disinheriting you?" "Absolutely." "So you're truly on your own now?" "Yes." Adrian sat across from her. "Then I have a proposition. You work here, really work, not just temporary charity. You learn the estate, contribute to its running. In exchange, room and board, and a small wage when we can manage it. You don't have to. I'm not doing it out of pity. I need people I can trust, and you need a place to prove you're more than what they made you." He leaned forward. "But Clara, this won't be easy. The work is hard. The winters are brutal, and your past will follow you. There will be consequences." Clara thought about her mother's face, her sister's futures, the Duke's rage, Beatrice's betrayal. She thought about everything she was giving up, security, status, the life she'd been promised. Then she thought about the last 3 days, the blisters on her hands, the ache in her back, the small, fierce satisfaction of completing work she'd never thought she could do. "I accept," she said. Outside, the sun was setting over the sea, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Clara watched it through the window and wondered if she'd just made the bravest decision of her life or the stupidest. But either way, it was hers. And that was something the Duke could never take away. The words were still echoing in Clara's mind 2 weeks later when winter arrived early, vicious and unannounced. She woke to find frost coating the inside of her window, her breath visible in the air. Downstairs, Adrian was already stoking the fire, his expression grim. "Storm coming," he said without preamble. "Big one. We need to get the livestock secured and the crops covered before it hits." Clara had learned enough by now to understand what that meant. Everyone working until the job was done, no matter how long it took or how brutal the conditions. She pulled on every layer she owned and went outside. The wind hit like a fist. Clara had never experienced cold like this in London, the kind that cut through clothing and found every exposed inch of skin. The sky was the color of old bruises, clouds moving fast and low. "Clara!" Sarah's voice cut through the wind. "Help me with the sheep. We need them in the lower barn before the snow starts." The sheep, as it turned out, were even less cooperative than the chickens. They scattered and panicked, and Clara spent an hour chasing them through fields while the wind tried to knock her over. Her hands went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned with cold. But she kept moving. Because that's what you did here. You kept moving until the work was done, or you collapsed. There was no one to do it for you. By the time they got the last sheep secured, snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes. Clara's legs shook with exhaustion as she stumbled back to the main house. Inside, the workers had gathered around the fire, all of them looking worn and worried. Thomas stood near Adrian, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Worse than the last one. If it dumps as much snow as I think, we could be cut off for days, maybe a week." "We have enough supplies?" Adrian asked. "Food, yes. Fuel's tight. And if anything breaks, if we lose livestock, if the cold gets into the root cellar, we'll manage. We always do." Thomas's jaw tightened. "With respect, you've never had dead weight to carry before." His eyes cut to Clara. She was getting used to this, the constant reminder that she was seen as a burden, a liability, something extra that might cost them all when resources got tight. "Clara works as hard as anyone," Adrian said quietly. "You know that." "She works hard at learning. That's not the same as being useful." Thomas lowered his voice, but not enough. "If this storm is as bad as I think, we can't afford passengers." Clara's face burned, but she kept her mouth shut. Arguing would only prove his point, that she was a distraction, trouble, exactly what he'd predicted. The storm hit in full force that night. Wind screamed around the house, rattling windows and finding every crack in the walls. Snow piled up against the doors, and by morning, the world outside had disappeared into a wall of white. 4 feet already, Thomas reported, coming in from checking the outbuildings. "And it's not stopping. We're completely cut off." The next 3 days were a study in collective survival. Everyone worked constantly, feeding animals, hauling water, keeping fires going, checking for damage. The cold was relentless, seeping through stone walls and into bones. Clara threw herself into whatever needed doing. She hauled wood until her shoulders screamed. She helped Sarah cook massive pots of stew to keep everyone fed. She learned to milk cows with frozen fingers, to break ice on water troughs, to work through exhaustion that made her vision blur. And still, she could feel the resentment building. It came out in small ways. Workers who wouldn't meet her eyes, conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way Thomas assigned her the worst jobs with barely concealed contempt. On the 4th day, one of the sheep died, just froze to death despite all their efforts. "This is what I was talking about," Thomas said, standing over the carcass. "We're stretched too thin, working too hard to cover for those who can't pull their weight." "One sheep dying in a blizzard doesn't," Adrian started. "It's not just the sheep. It's everything. We're burning through fuel faster because we have an extra mouth to feed. We're taking longer to finish work because we have to teach basic skills instead of just doing the job. Every resource we spend on her is something we can't spend elsewhere. She's learning. Learning isn't enough when survival's at stake." Clara, standing in the doorway, felt something crack inside her. She'd been biting her tongue for weeks, accepting the judgment, trying to prove herself through work alone. But she was so tired, and Thomas was right. She was a burden. No matter how hard she worked, she'd always be playing catch-up, always costing more than she contributed. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "When the storm breaks," Clara continued, her voice steady despite the chaos inside, "I'll go." "You're right, Thomas. I'm dead weight. I'm costing you resources you need." "Clara," Adrian started. "No, he's right. I came here thinking I could just learn to be useful. But this isn't a game. These people depend on each other, and I'm putting that at risk." Thomas's expression was unreadable. "Where would you go?" "I don't know, but that's not your problem." She turned and walked away before either of them could respond. That night, alone in her room, Clara faced the reality she'd been avoiding. She'd run from one impossible situation straight into another. At least in London, she'd understood the rules. Here, she was failing at a game she didn't know how to play. She was packing, mechanically folding the few clothes she owned, when someone knocked. Sarah entered without waiting for permission, her face hard. "You're really going to run away again?" "I'm not running away. I'm leaving before I cause more problems." "Same thing." Sarah crossed her arms. "You know what I think? I think you're a coward." Clara's hand stilled. "Excuse me?" "You came here making big declarations about freedom and choosing your own life, but the second it gets hard, you quit. That's not courage. That's just trading one easy exit for another." "There's nothing easy about this." "No? You don't want to be sold to a duke, so you run. You don't want to deal with Thomas's judgment, so you leave. You keep running from hard things and calling it bravery." Sarah's voice was sharp, cutting. "You want to know why we don't trust you? It's not because you're from London or because you can't milk a cow. It's because we can all see that you're one bad day away from disappearing." "I'm trying." "Trying isn't staying. We've all been where you are. Scared, incompetent, sure we'd fail. The difference is we stayed anyway. We pushed through the fear and the judgment and the mistakes because we had nowhere else to go." "You always have somewhere else to go. That's your real privilege, not the money or the education. It's the option to quit." The words landed like blows. Clara sank onto the bed, her carefully folded clothes forgotten. "I don't have anywhere to go. My father disowned me." "Then go back and beg. I'm sure the Duke would still take you if you groveled enough. Your father said so in his letter." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but you need to decide what you actually want. If you want to survive here, you can't keep one foot out the door." After Sarah left, Clara sat in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about London, about the life she'd fled, about her mother and sisters, about the Duke and Beatrice probably laughing together somewhere warm and comfortable. She thought about how easy it would be to write a letter, to apologize, to submit. And she realized Sarah was right. Part of her had been holding on to that option, keeping it available as an escape route, a safety net. But safety nets were cages by another name. Clara unpacked her bag slowly, deliberately. Then she went downstairs to find Adrian. He was in his study, working by lamplight on what looked like estate ledgers. He looked up when she entered. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Good. But I need something from you. I need you to stop protecting me from Thomas. Stop defending me. Stop making excuses. Let me fight my own battles." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "That's going to be harder than you think." "I know. But it's the only way this works." "All right." He set down his pen. "But, Clara, understand what you're asking. Thomas will push you harder if I'm not running interference. The others will follow his lead. You'll have to earn their respect on your own terms." "I'm aware." "And if you can't?" Clara thought about her father's letter, about Beatrice's laugh, about every person who'd ever assumed she was too weak, too soft, too useless to matter. "Then I'll fail on my own terms, too." The storm finally broke on the 6th day. Clara woke to silence, the absence of wind so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Outside, everything was buried under snow. Drifts as high as her shoulders blocked doorways. The path to the barn was completely invisible. Thomas organized teams immediately. "We need to dig out the livestock buildings first, then the pathways. Then assess damage." He barely glanced at Clara when he assigned her to the digging crew. The work was brutal. Shoveling snow in sub-zero temperatures, every muscle screaming, hands numb even inside gloves. Clara worked beside men twice her size, forcing herself to match their pace even when her body begged her to stop. By midday, they'd cleared a path to the first barn. Inside, 2 more sheep had died, frozen in the night. "Damn it!" Thomas kicked at the snow, his face hard. "That's 3 total. We can't afford these losses." "It's not your fault," one of the workers said. "We did everything we could." Wasn't enough, though, was it? They worked through the afternoon, and Clara felt herself starting to understand the rhythm of it, not just the physical labor, but the mental math everyone was constantly doing. Every loss mattered. Every resource counted. There was no margin for error. As the sun began to set, painting the snow orange and gold, Clara heard Thomas call her name. "Clara, need you on the roof." She looked up.
The main barn's roof was sagging under the weight of snow, threatening to collapse. Someone needs to get up there and shovel it off before it caves, Thomas continued. You're lightest, less likely to make it worse. Clara stared at the roof, at the rickety ladder leading up to it, at the way the whole structure groaned under the snow's weight. You want me to climb onto a roof that might collapse? Yes. In the dark. We've got lamps. And we need to do this now, before it gets worse.
Clara could see the challenge in his eyes. This was a test. Give her the most dangerous job, see if she'd refuse, prove she was too soft for this life. Every instinct screamed at her to say no. But Sarah's words echoed in her mind. You're one bad day away from disappearing. Show me where to start, Clara said. The climb up was terrifying. The ladder was slick with ice, the rungs too far apart, and her hands shook as she gripped each one. Below, workers held lamps, their light throwing strange shadows across the snow. The roof groaned under her weight. Easy, Thomas called up. Test each step before you commit. Clara inched across the roof, shovel in hand, trying to distribute her weight. The snow was deeper than she'd thought, packed hard by wind. She started shoveling, sending heavy chunks sliding off the edge. Keep moving, Thomas directed. Clear a path from the peak down. She worked methodically, trying not to think about the drop, about the way the roof creaked, about how if it gave way, she'd fall into a barn full of panicked animals and broken wood. She was halfway across when she heard it, a crack like a gunshot. Clara! Thomas's voice was sharp. Don't move! She froze. Under her feet, the roof had developed a split, wood splintering under the snow's weight. Back up, slowly, same way you came. Clara's heart hammered. She took a step back, testing the boards. Another crack. Faster! But moving faster meant putting more weight on already compromised wood. Clara could see the equation clearly. Move too slow and the roof would collapse. Move too fast and her weight would push it over the edge. She started moving, each step deliberate, the roof groaning beneath her. She was 3 steps from the ladder when the boards gave way. Clara dropped, her stomach lurching, and for a horrible moment she was in free fall. Then her hand caught something, the ladder's top rung, and her shoulder screamed as her weight jerked to a stop. She hung there, one hand on the ladder, feet dangling over nothing, while above her the roof continued collapsing in slow motion, snow and wood crashing into the barn below. Grab the ladder! Thomas was running toward her. Both hands! Clara swung her other arm up, catching the rung, and started climbing down even as the roof came apart above her. Wood and snow rained around her, and she heard animals screaming inside the barn. Her feet hit solid ground just as the entire section of roof she'd been standing on collapsed inward. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Thomas was beside her, his hand on her shoulder. You all right? Clara couldn't speak. She nodded, shaking. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. He was looking at her differently now, reassessing. You could have refused. Would you have? No, but I'm used to this. You're not. I'm getting there. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, not yet, but acknowledgement at least. Yeah, maybe you are. They spent the next hour stabilizing what was left of the barn, moving animals, salvaging what they could. By the time they finished, Clara was so exhausted she could barely stand. Back at the house, Sarah pressed a bowl of hot stew into her hands. Heard what happened? You're either very brave or very stupid. Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true. But Sarah was almost smiling. Eat. You've earned it. That night, for the first time since arriving, Clara sat at the long table with the other workers and nobody looked at her like she was an outsider. They didn't welcome her exactly, but the hostility had softened into something closer to cautious acceptance. It wasn't much, but it was progress. 3 days later, riders appeared on the horizon. Clara was hauling water when she heard the shout. She looked up to see 2 men on horseback picking their way through the snow-covered road. Her stomach dropped. Visitors were rare this time of year, and something about the way they sat their horses, formal, purposeful, made her uneasy. By the time they reached the main house, Adrian was already outside waiting. Clara hung back, but close enough to hear. Lord Hale, the lead rider dismounted, his expensive coat marking him as London quality. I bring a message from the Duke of Ashford. Clara's blood turned to ice. Adrian's expression didn't change. The Duke can send messages through normal channels. This message required personal delivery. The man pulled out a sealed letter and verification of a certain individual's presence. His eyes found Clara, and she saw recognition flash across his face. "There you are, Miss Whitmore. You've led us on quite a chase." Clara stepped forward, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm not going back. That's not your decision to make." "Actually, it is. I'm an adult. I can live where I choose." The man's smile was cold. "The Duke disagrees. He believes you made a binding commitment that you violated. He's prepared to pursue legal action for breach of contract and financial damages." "There was no contract, only my father's agreements, which I never signed." "Your father acted as your legal guardian. His agreements are binding." "My father disowned me. He has no legal authority over me anymore." The man's smile widened. "Actually, he hasn't, not officially. There's been no public declaration, no legal documentation filed, which means technically you're still under his authority, and he's given the Duke permission to retrieve you by whatever means necessary." Clara's mind raced. Her father's letter had threatened disownment, but he'd never followed through, which meant legally she was still his property to dispose of as he saw fit. "She's not going anywhere," Adrian said quietly. "With respect, Lord Hale, this isn't your concern. Miss Whitmore has obligations. I'm making it my concern." The man's expression hardened. "The Duke expected resistance. He's prepared to escalate this matter if necessary. Legal action against you for harboring a runaway. Social pressure on your name and estate. And if that doesn't work—" He glanced at the workers who'd gathered to watch. "Well, accidents happen in remote areas, especially in winter. People get cut off, supplies run short. It would be a shame if this estate faced unexpected difficulties." The threat was unmistakable. Thomas stepped forward, his face dangerous. "You threatening us?" "I'm explaining consequences. The Duke is a powerful man with powerful friends. It would be very easy to make life difficult for everyone here." The messenger's eyes swept across the assembled workers. "Unless, of course, Miss Whitmore returns willingly, then everyone can go back to their lives without incident." Clara felt the weight of every eye on her. These people had just started to accept her, had just begun to see her as something other than a burden, and now she was bringing exactly the kind of trouble Thomas had predicted. Powerful enemies, legal threats, danger to everything they'd built. "Give us a moment," Adrian said. The messenger inclined his head. "Of course, but understand, I need an answer before I leave. The Duke's patience is exhausted." Inside, Adrian's study felt too small, the walls pressing in. "He's bluffing," Adrian said immediately. "He can't actually—" "He's not bluffing. The Duke has connections everywhere. He could destroy this place." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "And he will, if I stay." "You know he will." "Then we'll fight it." "With what?" "You're an earl, but you're not powerful enough to stand against the Duke." "Not really. And these people, Sarah, Thomas, all of them, they shouldn't have to suffer because of me." "Clara, I knew this was coming. I just didn't think it would be so soon." She looked out the window at the snow-covered fields, at the life she'd just started to build. "I'll go back. I'll find a way to end this legally, properly. But I won't let him destroy you." "No." Adrian's voice was hard. "You're not sacrificing yourself again. That's what got you into this mess in the first place. Always sacrificing, always putting everyone else first." "Then what do you suggest?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, "Marry me." Clara stared at him. "What?" "Marry me. Right now, before they leave. If you're married, your father's authority ends. The Duke's claim ends. You're no longer property to be traded. That's insane. It's practical. A legal marriage changes everything. Adrian, you can't just... We barely know each other. This is your whole life you're talking about. And you're talking about giving up yours." He stepped closer, his expression intense. "Listen to me. This isn't some romantic gesture. It's a strategic move. We get married, the legal situation changes, the Duke loses his leverage. You stay here, keep working, keep building the life you started. Nothing else has to change. Everything would change. You'd be bound to me. I'd be helping someone who deserves help. Adrian's voice softened. And maybe in the process, I'd have a partner instead of just an employee. Someone who understands what it means to walk away from everything you're supposed to be. Clara's mind reeled. Marriage. Again. Another man offering it as a solution. But this was different. The Duke had wanted her money. Adrian was offering her freedom. They'll say you're insane, she said quietly, marrying a scandal-ridden runaway, tying yourself to someone society's already cast out. Let them say it. I stopped caring what society thinks a long time ago. And if this doesn't work, if the Duke finds another way, then we'll deal with it. Together. Clara looked at this man who'd taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who'd given her work and purpose and a chance to prove herself, who was now offering to tie his entire life to hers just to keep her safe. This is madness, she said. Probably. We could both regret this. Possibly. And it won't be a real marriage, not in any meaningful way. I understand. Clara took a deep breath. Outside, the messenger was waiting for an answer, and beyond him, the Duke, powerful, vengeful, determined to drag her back to London and make her pay for the humiliation she'd caused. She thought about going back, apologizing, submitting, living the rest of her life as punishment for daring to want something different. Then she thought about Sarah's words. Trying isn't staying. All right, Clara said. Let's do it. They found the local minister in the village, roused him from his dinner, and explained the situation. He looked at them like they'd lost their minds. You want to get married, right now, because a Duke's messenger is threatening legal action. That's correct, Adrian said. And you've known each other for, 3 weeks? About that. The minister rubbed his face. This is the most irregular thing I've ever been asked to do. Will you do it? He looked between them, Adrian calm and certain, Clara vibrating with barely controlled panic. Then he sighed. I'll do it, but only because I know you, Adrian, and I trust you're not completely insane. He pulled out his register. Do you have witnesses? They used Sarah and Thomas, both of whom looked stunned when Adrian explained what was happening. You're marrying her, Thomas said flatly. Right now, to stop the Duke. Yes. That's either brilliant or the stupidest thing you've ever done. Everyone keeps saying that too, Clara muttered. The ceremony was brutally short. No flowers, no music, no celebration. Just words spoken quickly while the minister's wife looked on in shock and the witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Do you, Adrian Hale, take this woman? I do. And do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man? Clara looked at Adrian, really looked at him. At the man who'd given her shelter, who'd defended her when everyone else doubted, who was now legally binding his life to hers just to keep her free. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no rings, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a desperate move to escape a trap. They had the minister prepare the certificate immediately, signed and witnessed and official. Then they rode back to the estate to face the messenger. He was waiting outside, his patience clearly wearing thin. Well? Miss Whitmore is no longer available, Adrian said calmly. She's married. The messenger's eyes widened. Married? To whom? To me. As of 20 minutes ago. Here's the certificate. The man snatched the paper, reading it quickly. His face went through several colors before settling on purple. This is fraud, a sham marriage designed to evade legal obligation. It's a legal marriage, properly witnessed and recorded, which means Clara is no longer under her father's authority. The Duke's claims are void. The Duke will never accept this. The Duke doesn't have a choice. The messenger leaned in close, his voice dropping to a hiss. You've made a powerful enemy today, Hale. The Duke of Ashford doesn't forget slights, and he has a very long reach. I'll take that risk. The man turned to Clara, his expression venomous. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? You're still ruined, still a disgrace, and now you've dragged this fool down with you. He mounted his horse, gathering the reins. The Duke will make sure everyone knows what you are. He'll destroy your name so thoroughly that even this remote wasteland won't shelter you. He rode off without waiting for a response, his companion following. Clara stood in the snow, watching them disappear, and felt the weight of what she'd just done settle over her like a shroud. "Well," Sarah said into the silence, "that was dramatic." Clara started laughing, a high, slightly hysterical sound that she couldn't quite control. "I'm married. Again. Except this time I actually went through with it. To a man you've known for 3 weeks," Thomas added, "because a duke threatened us." "Yes." "And you think this solves the problem?" "No," Adrian said quietly. "But it changes the game. That's all we can do sometimes. Change the game when you can't win by the current rules." The workers were all watching now, and Clara could see them processing this new reality. Their employer had just married a scandalous runaway to protect her from a vengeful duke, which meant they were all now tied to whatever consequences came next. "I'm sorry," Clara said, addressing them all. "I brought this trouble here. If you want to leave, if you want to distance yourselves from—" "Oh, shut up," Sarah interrupted. "You think this is the first time we've dealt with trouble? We're survivors. All of us. We'll handle whatever comes." "Sarah's right," Thomas said, and Clara almost fell over in shock. "We're in this now. Might as well see it through." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Clara felt her throat tighten. These people who'd resented her, judged her, tested her at every turn, they were standing with her. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank us yet," Thomas said. "The Duke's going to come back harder. And when he does, we all need to be ready." That night, as Clara lay in bed, still her own bed, in her own room, nothing about the physical arrangement changed. She stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. She was married to a man she barely knew. She'd made an enemy of one of England's most powerful aristocrats. She'd tied her fate to a remote coastal estate and the people who lived there. And somehow, despite the fear and uncertainty and the knowledge that this was far from over, she felt more alive than she ever had in London. Through the wall, she could hear the sea, relentless and wild. She was married now, legally protected. The Duke's claim was broken. But the messenger's words echoed in her mind. "The Duke will make sure everyone knows what you are." And lying there in the darkness, listening to the waves crash against cliffs, Clara realized that the real battle hadn't even started yet. The Duke wasn't going to let this go. He would come back, harder and more ruthless, determined to make her pay for the humiliation she'd caused. And when he did, everything she'd built here, every friendship, every small victory, every moment of hard-won peace, would be on the line. The door to her cage had locked behind her. Now she just had to hope the lock would hold. It didn't take long to find out it wouldn't. The Duke's retaliation started small, so small that at first Clara thought maybe they'd gotten lucky. A week passed with no word from London. Then 2. The estate settled into the rhythm of winter work, and Clara almost let herself believe the marriage had actually solved the problem. Then the supply deliveries stopped coming. "What do you mean, cancelled?" Adrian's voice was tight as he spoke to the merchant who'd ridden up from the village. "We have standing orders. We've been doing business for 5 years. The merchant wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lord Hale. Orders from above. I can't explain more than that." "From above? From whom?" "I think you know." After the merchant left, Thomas pulled Adrian aside. Clara watched from across the yard, saw the way Thomas's jaw clenched, saw Adrian's shoulders tighten. When they came inside, Thomas's face was grim. "It's starting. The Duke's putting pressure on anyone who does business with us. Supplies, trade partners, everything." He dropped into a chair. "We're being cut off." "He can't control everyone," Sarah protested. "He doesn't have to. Just enough to make things difficult. And it's working. We're already low on grain, fuel, medical supplies. If we can't get deliveries, we'll have to start rationing." Clara felt the familiar weight of guilt settle over her chest. "This is because of me." "This is because the Duke's a vindictive bastard," Thomas corrected, surprising her. "But yes, you're the trigger. He's trying to force us to give you up by making your presence too expensive to maintain." "So what do we do?" Sarah asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at the maps on his desk. Then he said, "We adapt. Find new suppliers. Go around the Duke's influence. That'll take time we don't have, and money we definitely don't have. Then we make do with less." But making do with less, Clara quickly learned, meant everyone suffered. Rations got tighter, work got harder. The mood on the estate grew tense and brittle, and through it all, Clara could feel the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was she worth it? She worked harder, trying to prove her value. Up before dawn, working past dark, taking on the worst jobs without complaint. Her hands were permanently cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her body ached constantly. But she didn't stop. 3 weeks after the messenger's visit, a letter arrived. Clara recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. Clara, your reckless actions have destroyed this family. Your father suffered an apoplectic fit when news of your sham marriage reached London. The doctors say his left side is paralyzed. He may never walk again. Your sisters are unmarriageable now. Elizabeth's engagement was broken. Margaret and Anne aren't even being invited to social events. They ask about you constantly, and I don't know what to tell them except that their eldest sister chose her own selfish desires over their futures. The Duke has been remarkably patient. He's offered to forgive everything, the scandal, the humiliation, the expense, if you annul this ridiculous marriage and return to fulfill your original commitment. He says he'll even intercede with your father, help restore the family's standing. I'm begging you, Clara, not as your mother, but as a woman who's watched 3 daughters' lives crumble because of your choices. Come home. Make this right, before you destroy what's left of us. Clara read the letter 3 times, each word landing like a physical blow. Her father, paralyzed. Her sisters, ruined. And the Duke, magnanimous in his offer of forgiveness, as long as she crawled back and submitted. She found Adrian in the stables, checking on a horse that had gone lame. My mother wrote. Clara's voice sounded distant, disconnected. My father had a stroke. My sisters can't find husbands. The Duke says he'll fix everything if I come back. Adrian's hand stilled on the horse's leg. Do you believe him? About the damage? Yes. About fixing it? Clara laughed bitterly. He'll fix it by making an example of me, by showing everyone what happens when women step out of line. But you're considering it. How can I not? My father's paralyzed, Adrian. My sisters' lives are destroyed. How much suffering am I supposed to cause before I admit this was a mistake? Adrian stood, facing her. Your father chose to have that stroke when he heard about your marriage. Your mother chose to write that letter to manipulate you. And your sisters, they're casualties of a system that was already broken, Clara. You didn't break it. You just stopped pretending it wasn't. That's easy to say when it's not your family. My sister died because she believed she had to marry the man our parents chose. She was miserable, and when childbirth went wrong, she didn't have the will to fight. His voice was raw. So don't tell me I don't understand the cost. I live with it every day. Clara pressed her hands to her face. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do. You're just afraid to do it. And what's that? Fight back. The idea came to Clara in the middle of the night, born from anger and desperation in equal measure. The Duke was using his influence to isolate them, cutting off their resources and waiting for the estate to collapse under the pressure. He was playing a game he knew how to win: social manipulation, economic warfare, the slow squeeze of privilege and power. But what if they changed the game? She found Adrian at breakfast, Thomas and Sarah already there going over supply lists that got grimmer by the day. I have an idea, Clara said. You're going to think it's insane. I married you 3 weeks ago to thwart a duke, Adrian pointed out. My threshold for insanity has expanded considerably. Clara took a breath. We make this public. Everything. The Duke's affair with my cousin, his mercenary marriage plans, the way he's using his power to destroy anyone who helps me. We expose him. Silence. Then Thomas laughed. That's not insane. That's suicide. Why? Because he's powerful? He's powerful because people are afraid to challenge him. But what happens when everyone knows what he really is? They'll side with him anyway, Sarah said quietly. Men like the Duke always win. Even when people know the truth, they pretend not to because it's easier than fighting. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe if enough people know, if the story spreads far enough, his power stops being absolute. And how exactly do you plan to spread this story? Thomas asked. We can't even get grain delivered. You think newspapers are going to publish accusations against a duke? No, but penny papers will. Scandal sheets, the kind of publications that thrive on destroying reputations. Clara leaned forward. The duke's been controlling the narrative. We've been reactive, defensive. What if we go on offense? Adrian was watching her with something like fascination. You want to wage a propaganda war against one of England's most powerful aristocrats. I want to stop letting him define the terms of this fight. It could backfire spectacularly, make things worse instead of better. Things are already getting worse. At least this way we're taking action instead of just waiting to starve. Thomas drummed his fingers on the table. It's a terrible idea. Absolutely terrible. He paused. But I don't have a better one. We'd need evidence, Sarah said slowly. Not just accusations. People need to believe it. I overheard the Duke and Beatrice planning everything. I can write out exactly what they said, names and details. Your word against a Duke's? That won't hold. Then we find more. There have to be other people who know the truth. Servants who saw them together. Friends who suspected. We build a case. Adrian stood, pacing. If we do this, there's no going back. The Duke will come at us with everything he has. Legal action, social destruction, possibly worse. He's already coming at us. This just means we hit back. And if it doesn't work? If we expose him and nothing changes? Clara thought about her mother's letter, about her father's stroke, about her sister's ruined prospects, about the workers on this estate who were suffering because she'd brought trouble to their door. Then at least we tried. At least we didn't just submit. They started carefully, quietly. Clara wrote out everything she remembered from that conversation in the garden, every detail of the Duke's voice, Beatrice's words, the casual cruelty of their plans. Sarah suggested reaching out to her mother's old maid, a woman who'd been let go years ago under suspicious circumstances. She worked in the Duke's household before he got engaged to you. Left suddenly, wouldn't say why. But there were rumors. They found the woman in a boarding house in York, living on meager savings. Her name was Margaret, and when Clara explained why they'd come, her face went hard. You want to know about the Duke? About what kind of man he really is? Yes. Margaret poured tea with shaking hands. I worked in his London house for 3 years. Saw things I was told to forget. Women coming and going at odd hours. Arguments with his solicitors about debts. And your cousin, she was a regular visitor long before the engagement was announced. Were they having an affair? I can't prove it, but I saw them together often enough to know it wasn't innocent. Margaret met Clara's eyes. The Duke dismissed me because I asked questions, paid me off with the understanding that I'd stay quiet. Would you be willing to speak publicly, to put your name to what you know? You mean destroy what's left of my reputation and any chance of future employment? Margaret laughed bitterly. Why would I do that? Because other women deserve to know what they're walking into. Because silence protects men like him. Silence also keeps food on my table. Clara understood. She'd been asked to make the same calculation, safety versus truth. What if we could protect you, give you work here at the estate? You can barely feed the people you already have. I've heard about the Duke's blockade. We'll manage. We always do. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very stupid, Lady Hale. I've been told both, usually in the same sentence. That got a small smile. All right, I'll tell what I know. But if this goes badly, it probably will, Clara admitted, but at least we'll have tried. They found 2 more witnesses, a former solicitor's clerk who'd handled the Duke's debt negotiations, and a lady's maid who'd worked in Clara's own household and overheard conversations between the Duke and Beatrice. Clara wrote it all down, compiled it into a detailed account that read like a penny novel, but had the advantage of being true. Then they had to figure out how to publish it. The respectable papers won't touch this, Thomas said. Too afraid of libel suits. Then we find the disreputable ones. Adrian knew a man in London who ran a scandal sheet called The Morning Whisper. He's a mercenary. If the story's good enough and we can pay, he'll print it. How much? More than we have. Clara looked at the small pile of jewelry she'd brought from London, her mother's pearl necklace, the few rings and brooches she hadn't been able to leave behind. Would these cover it? Clara, those are...
Useless here. I can't eat pearls, I can't plant them, but I can use them to tell the truth. She pushed them across the table. Sell them. Use the money. Make this happen. Adrian left for London the next day, carrying Clara's jewelry and the compiled testimony. Sarah took over estate management while he was gone, and Clara threw herself into work, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. A week later, Adrian returned with a copy of the Morning Whisper that featured on the front page a lurid headline, Duke's Deception, Noble Marriage Scheme Exposed underneath, in smaller print, Aristocrats Plan to Wed for Fortune while Maintaining Secret Affair Revealed. Clara read the article with her heart in her throat. It was sensationalized, certainly. The paper had added dramatic language that made it sound like a Gothic novel, but all the facts were there. The witnesses' testimonies, the Duke's debts, the affair with Beatrice. It's out there now, Adrian said quietly. No taking it back. How long until the Duke sees it? If he hasn't already, he will by tomorrow. They didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, a different messenger arrived, this one representing the Duke's solicitors. The letter was brief and venomous. Lord Hale, the publication of libelous accusations against the Duke of Ashford constitutes actionable defamation. Legal proceedings will commence immediately. You will be sued for damages in excess of £10,000. Additionally, criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud may be pursued. This was your final warning. Return Clara Whitmore to her father's custody immediately or face complete financial and social destruction. £10,000. More money than the estate made in 5 years. They'll take everything, Thomas said, reading over Clara's shoulder. The land, the house, all of it. Only if they can prove defamation, Adrian said, and everything we published is true. Truth doesn't always matter in court, especially when you're fighting a duke. But something strange was happening. The article had spread faster than anyone expected, picked up by other papers, discussed in coffee houses and drawing rooms across London. And the response was mixed. Letters started arriving at the estate. Some were supportive, women thanking Clara for exposing the Duke's character, men expressing disgust at his mercenary behavior. Others were vicious, calling her a liar, a whore, a woman who'd destroyed her own family for attention. But people were talking. The Duke's reputation was no longer untouchable. This is working, Sarah said, reading through the letters. Look, 3 different people offering to send supplies. 2 offering money to help with legal fees. It's not enough, Thomas argued. Public opinion doesn't win court cases. No, but it changes the calculation, Adrian said. The Duke's power comes from his reputation. If that's damaged, if people start questioning him, he becomes desperate, Clara finished, which might make him sloppy. She was right, though not in the way she expected. The Duke's next move came fast and brutal. He showed up at the estate himself, flanked by 6 men and his solicitor. Clara was in the barn when she heard the commotion. She ran outside to find the Duke dismounting from his horse, his face twisted with rage. "Where is she?" he demanded. Adrian stepped forward, blocking his path. "You're trespassing." "I'm collecting what's mine." "Clara isn't yours. She never was." The Duke's eyes found Clara across the yard. "You think you've won? You think spreading lies in gutter papers changes anything?" Clara walked forward, her fear buried under anger. "They're not lies. You know they're not. I know you're a vengeful, ungrateful child who couldn't accept the honor I offered." He turned to Adrian. "And you're a fool who threw away his reputation for used goods." "Careful." Adrian's voice went cold. "You're still on my property." "Not for long. By the time my solicitors are done, this property will be sold to cover damages. You'll both be penniless and disgraced." The Duke smiled, cruel and certain. "You wanted attention? You have it. Now watch as it destroys everything you touch." But something in his voice was off. He was too angry, too personally invested. A truly powerful man would have sent representatives, would have stayed above it all. Clara realized what was happening. "You're scared." The Duke's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "You came here yourself. That's not power, that's panic." She stepped closer. "The story's spreading, isn't it? People are talking, asking questions, and you can't control it like you thought you could." "I control everything." "Not anymore. Not completely." Clara felt something shift inside her, that defiant girl from the garden finally taking full control. You came here to intimidate us into silence, but it won't work, because we've already told the truth. And now everyone knows what you are. The Duke's face went red. You'll regret this, both of you. I'll make sure that we what? Suffer? We're already suffering. You've made sure of that. Clara gestured around them. But we're still here, still standing, and you're the one who had to ride 2 days to threaten us in person. Clara, Adrian warned, but she couldn't stop. Months of fear and anger and suppressed rage were pouring out. You wanted to buy me like livestock. When I refused, you tried to starve us out. When that didn't work, you threatened legal action. And now you're here, personally, because none of it's working the way you planned. I am the Duke of Ashford. My family has held power for 3 centuries. You are nothing, a scandal, a footnote, a woman who destroyed her family for pride. Maybe, but I'm a footnote who exposed you, who showed everyone that the great Duke of Ashford is just a bankrupt aristocrat who tried to marry for money while keeping his real lover on the side. Clara's voice carried across the yard, loud enough for everyone to hear. And now the whole country knows it. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the Duke lunged at her. He didn't get far. Thomas and 2 other workers intercepted him, holding him back as he struggled. Get your hands off me. You're leaving, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. Now, before I have you arrested for assault. You wouldn't dare. Try me. The Duke jerked free, straightening his coat with shaking hands. This isn't over. I will destroy you. Both of you. You'll beg for mercy before I'm done. We'll take that risk. The Duke remounted, his men following suit, but before he left, he turned back to Clara. Your father's dying. Did your mother tell you that? The stroke was worse than they thought. He's asking for you. Clara's breath caught. But you won't see him again, will you? Because you chose this. You chose pride over family, scandal over duty. Remember that when he's gone. Remember that your last words to him were a letter saying you wouldn't come back. He rode off, leaving Clara standing in the snow, his words echoing in her ears. Tim. He's lying, Sarah said firmly, trying to manipulate you. Maybe. But what if he's not? They were gathered in Adrian's study, the fire burning low, everyone exhausted from the confrontation. Even if he's telling the truth, going back won't help your father, Adrian said. It'll just give the Duke what he wants. But if my father's dying, then he's dying surrounded by family who chose to stay in that world. You chose to leave. That doesn't make you responsible for his condition. Clara wanted to believe that, but the guilt was crushing. I need air. She walked out into the night, the cold biting at her skin. Behind her she heard footsteps, Thomas, surprisingly. You did good today, he said without preamble. Standing up to him like that. I may have made things worse. Maybe. But at least you made him bleed. Thomas leaned against the fence beside her. You know what I realized watching you? You're tougher than half the men here. You came from nothing. No skills, no experience, just determination. And you learned. You adapted. You survived. I'm not sure survival counts as success when everyone around me suffers for it. That's not on you. That's on them. The Duke, your parents, everyone who built a system where women like you couldn't choose without consequences. He paused. You want to know why I fought you so hard at the beginning? Because I was useless? Because you reminded me of my sister. She married into society, tried to be what they wanted, and it broke her. She drank herself to death trying to numb the misery. His voice was rough. When you showed up all soft and scared, I thought you'd do the same, but you didn't. You got stronger. Clara didn't know what to say. Point is, you earned your place here. Not because you married Adrian or because you're running from the Duke. Because you work. You contribute. You're one of us now. Even though I brought all this trouble, especially because of that. Anyone can join when times are good. It's the ones who stay when it's hard that matter. After he left, Clara stood in the cold, letting his words sink in. She'd spent so long seeing herself as a burden, as someone who needed saving. But maybe that wasn't the whole truth anymore. Maybe she'd saved herself. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A letter arrived from London.
Not from the Duke or Clara's family, but from a women's advocacy group Clara had never heard of. Lady Hale, your courage in exposing the Duke of Ashford's behavior has inspired women across England. We are writing to offer our support in any legal action that follows. Additionally, we are organizing a public demonstration in London calling for reforms to marriage law and women's property rights. You have become a symbol of resistance to a system that treats women as property. Whether you intended this or not, your story has given voice to thousands who've suffered in silence. We stand with you. Similar letters followed, some from women's groups, others from journalists, a few from progressive members of Parliament who'd been looking for a wedge issue to challenge the old aristocracy. Clara's defiance had become a movement. "This is extraordinary," Adrian said, reading through them. "You've tapped into something bigger than just your situation. I didn't mean to become a symbol. The best symbols never do. But with visibility came danger. The Duke's lawyers filed their suit demanding £10,000 in damages and a public retraction. The case would go to court in 3 months. We can't win," Thomas said bluntly. "The courts favor aristocrats, always have." "Then we lose fighting," Clara said. "But we make sure everyone sees what we're fighting for." The weeks that followed were brutal. They prepared for court, gathered more evidence, reached out to allies. The estate's financial situation grew worse. They were down to basic rations, burning furniture for heat, making hard choices about which animals to keep fed. But the workers stayed. Every single one. "We're in this together," Sarah said when Clara asked why. "That's what family does." Family. The word hit Clara hard. She'd destroyed her birth family to escape a cage. But she'd found something else here. People who chose to stand with her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. 2 weeks before the trial, Clara received a letter from her mother. "Your father passed away last night." "Peacefully," the doctor said, "though I know that's a lie. He died angry and heartbroken, his last words asking why you abandoned us. I hope you're satisfied with your choices. You're free now, free from duty, from obligation, from the family that raised you. I hope that freedom keeps you warm. You are no longer my daughter." Clara read it once, then burned it in the fire. She felt the loss. How could she not? But underneath it was something else. Relief, maybe, or just the absence of guilt. She'd mourned this relationship already, back in London when she'd realized her mother saw her as a commodity instead of a person. This letter just made it official. "I'm sorry," Adrian said, finding her by the fire. "Don't be. She stopped being my mother a long time ago. I just didn't realize it. Still, loss is loss. Yes, but I'm not alone in it." Clara looked around at the house, at the people moving through it, at the life she'd built from nothing. "I have this. I have all of you. That's more family than I ever had in London." The day before they were set to leave for the trial, something unexpected happened. Beatrice showed up. She arrived in a plain carriage, dressed simply, her face showing signs of tears. Clara found her standing in the yard, looking lost. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you. Please." Clara should have sent her away, should have slammed the door in her face. But curiosity won. Inside, Beatrice wouldn't meet her eyes. "The Duke's furious about the trial, about the publicity. He's talking about destroying you completely, making sure you end up in debtor's prison." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm sorry." Beatrice's voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Clara. For everything. For the affair. For encouraging his plan. For betraying you. You think an apology fixes this?" "No. Nothing fixes it. But I needed you to know that I regret it. That seeing what he's doing to you, how far he's willing to go. It opened my eyes." Clara laughed bitterly. "Your eyes are open now, after months of helping him?" I know how weak that sounds." Beatrice finally looked up. "He promised we'd be together, that once the marriage was done and your money secured his estate, he'd find a way for us. I believed him because I wanted to, because I was afraid of ending up alone and unwanted. So you helped him trap me instead." "Yes, and I've been paying for it ever since. He's not kind when things don't go his way, Clara. The man I thought I loved doesn't exist. Maybe he never did." Clara studied her cousin.
This woman who'd laughed with her as children, who'd betrayed her without hesitation, who now stood here asking for,
What? Forgiveness? Why are you really here, Beatrice? I'm testifying. At the trial. I'm going to tell the truth about everything. The affair, his debts, the marriage scheme, all of it. Clara's breath caught. That will destroy your reputation. I'm already destroyed. The Duke's finished with me, and society knows we were involved. My family won't speak to me. I have nothing left to lose. Beatrice's hands twisted together. But you do. You have this place, these people, a life you built, and I can help protect it. By destroying yourself? By telling the truth. Finally, Clara wanted to hate her, should hate her. But looking at Beatrice now, broken and scared and trying to make amends, she mostly felt tired. All right, tell the truth. But don't expect forgiveness. I don't. I just expect to sleep better knowing I did one thing right. After Beatrice left, Clara found Adrian in the study. She's going to testify against him. Do you believe her? I think she's terrified and desperate. But yes, I think she'll do it. Adrian nodded slowly. Then we might actually have a chance. The morning they left for London, the entire estate turned out to see them off. Workers who'd doubted Clara, who'd resented her presence, who'd tested her at every turn, all of them stood in the yard, silent and solid. Thomas stepped forward, pressing something into Clara's hand. A folded paper signed by everyone. We stand with Lady Clara Hale. Whatever comes. Clara's throat tightened. She looked at these people, her people, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd spent her whole life trying to be what others wanted. Perfect daughter, suitable bride, decorative ornament. But here she'd become something else. Someone who worked and fought and refused to break. Someone worth standing with. Thank you, she managed. Win this, Sarah said simply. Come back and tell us you won. As the carriage pulled away, Clara watched the estate disappear behind them. 3 months ago, she'd arrived with nothing but a bag and desperate hope. Now she was leaving with an army. The Duke thought he'd broken her, thought he could crush her under the weight of his power and privilege. But Clara Whitmore, no, Clara Hale, had learned to survive in harsher climates than his contempt. And she was done being afraid, and she was done being afraid. The courtroom was packed. Clara had expected a small hearing, a dry legal proceeding witnessed by solicitors and clerks. Instead, she walked into a theater. Every bench was filled. People stood along the walls, crammed into the gallery, pressed against the doors. Women mostly, their faces eager and anxious. Clara recognized some from the letters, advocates, journalists, ordinary women who'd traveled to London to watch this unfold. They weren't just here for her trial, they were here for their own. This is unprecedented, Adrian murmured as they took their seats. I've never seen anything like this. The Duke sat across the aisle, flanked by 3 solicitors in expensive suits. He looked composed, confident, every inch the powerful aristocrat. But when his eyes met Clara's, she saw something flicker there. Fear. The judge entered, an older man with a face like weathered granite. He surveyed the crowd with obvious disapproval. This is a court of law, not a public spectacle. I will have order, or I will clear this room. The crowd quieted, but the tension remained, thick enough to taste. The Duke's lead solicitor stood first, laying out the case with practiced precision. Clara had published defamatory statements. She'd damaged the Duke's reputation, caused him financial harm, destroyed potential business relationships. The evidence was clear. The article existed, the accusations were public, and the Duke had suffered measurable consequences. The defense will claim truth as justification, the solicitor continued, his voice dripping with contempt. But truth requires evidence, not the hysterical accusations of a scorned woman seeking revenge. Adrian's solicitor, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Hendricks, who'd volunteered her services, rose smoothly. The truth requires evidence. Fortunately, we have it. She called Margaret first. The former maid walked to the witness box with visible nervousness, her hands clutching her worn Bible. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. I worked in the Duke's London household for 3 years. During that time, I witnessed Miss Beatrice Whitmore visit frequently, at odd hours, often staying late into the evening. I saw the Duke and Miss Whitmore in compromising positions on 3 separate occasions. The Duke's solicitor objected immediately. Hearsay, speculation, The witness cannot possibly know the nature of— I know what I saw, Margaret interrupted, and I was dismissed from service specifically because I questioned their relationship. You were dismissed for theft. That's a lie, and we both know it. The gallery erupted. The judge hammered his gavel, demanding silence. Mrs. Hendricks called the next witness, the solicitor's clerk, who'd handled the Duke's financial matters. The Duke owed approximately £40,000 across various creditors. His estate was hemorrhaging money. He specifically instructed us to prioritize finding a wealthy bride to shore up his finances. And you heard him say this explicitly? Multiple times. He was quite direct about needing to marry for money. More objections, more hammering of the gavel. Then Beatrice took the stand. The crowd's murmur rose to a roar. Clara's cousin looked pale, her hands shaking as she placed them on the Bible. The Duke's face went white, then red. He leaned toward his solicitor, whispering urgently. Mrs. Hendricks approached slowly. Miss Whitmore, would you describe your relationship with the Duke of Ashford? Beatrice's voice was barely audible. We were lovers. Speak up, please. We were lovers, louder this time, carrying across the courtroom, for 2 years before his engagement to my cousin. And did the Duke discuss his marriage plans with you? Yes, he said he needed Clara's fortune to save his estate, that the marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more, that once it was complete, he and I could continue our relationship. And you believed him? I wanted to. I was young and foolish and in love with a man who saw me as entertainment. Beatrice's voice cracked. Clara was my cousin. We grew up together, and I helped trap her into a loveless marriage because I was selfish enough to believe it wouldn't matter. The courtroom exploded. Women shouted. Men argued. The judge threatened to clear the room 3 times before order was restored. The Duke's solicitor tried to discredit Beatrice, suggested she was lying for attention, for revenge, for money. But she held firm, answering every question with devastating honesty. When she stepped down, she looked at Clara. I'm sorry, she mouthed. Clara didn't respond. The apology didn't erase the betrayal, but it was something. Mrs. Hendricks called Clara lass. Walking to the witness box felt like walking through water. Every eye in the room followed her, judging, measuring, waiting. Lady Hale, Mrs. Hendricks began, tell us what you overheard in your family's garden the night before your wedding. Clara had practiced this. She'd gone over it 100 times with Adrian, rehearsing every word. But standing here, under oath, with the Duke glaring at her from across the room, the words came harder than she'd expected. I heard the Duke and my cousin discussing their affair. He said he was marrying me for my father's fortune, that I was boring, that I was property, that once the transaction was complete, he could return to his real life. Clara forced herself to look at him. He called me dead weight, a particularly well-dressed piece of furniture. And how did that make you feel? Like I'd spent my entire life preparing for a role in someone else's play. Like I didn't matter as a person, only as a resource to be exploited. So you fled? So I chose myself instead, for the first time in my life. The Duke's solicitor stood for cross-examination. He was good, experienced, ruthless. He went after every detail, questioned every motive, suggested Clara had misheard, misunderstood, fabricated everything out of spite. Isn't it true you were desperate to avoid marriage? I was desperate to avoid being sold. Isn't it true you manufactured this entire scandal to escape your obligations? My only obligation was to survive. I chose to do that on my own terms. By destroying a man's reputation? By spreading lies? They're not lies. Clara's voice cut through the courtroom. Everything I said is true. Every witness has confirmed it. The Duke married for money while maintaining an affair. Those are facts, not fabrications. You expect this court to believe that a Duke would stoop to— I expect this court to understand that powerful men do terrible things when they think no one's watching. Clara looked directly at the judge. And that women who speak up are called liars, hysterics, scorned brides seeking revenge, anything to avoid acknowledging the truth. The solicitor's face reddened. You're out of order. I'm telling the truth. That's what we're here for, isn't it? The truth? The gallery erupted again. Women cheering, men shouting. The judge hammered until the gavel nearly split. When order finally restored, he called both parties forward. This case presents unusual circumstances. The defendant has provided substantial evidence supporting her claims. Multiple witnesses have testified under oath. The alleged defamation appears to be factual reporting rather than malicious falsehood. He paused, looking between Clara and the Duke. However, the publication has undeniably damaged the plaintiff's reputation and caused financial harm. Clara's heart sank. They'd proven the truth, but truth didn't always matter when power was involved. That said, the judge continued, the court cannot protect reputations that deserve to be damaged. If a man conducts himself in a manner worthy of public condemnation, he cannot then claim defamation when that condemnation occurs. The Duke shot to his feet. This is outrageous. I demand, you will sit down, Your Grace, or I will hold you in contempt. The silence was absolute. I find for the defendant, the judge said clearly. The accusations published were substantially true. No damages will be awarded. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Attorney General for investigation into potential fraud regarding the original marriage negotiations. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Women screamed with joy. Men shouted protests. The Duke's face went purple with rage. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. They'd won. Actually, won. Adrian grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. You did it. We did it. Mrs. Hendricks was grinning. That's the first time I've ever seen a Duke lose to a woman in open court. Historic, truly. The Duke pushed through the crowd, his solicitors scrambling to keep up. He stopped in front of Clara, his face twisted with fury. This isn't over. I'll appeal. You'll what? Clara's voice was steady, calm. You've already lost. The truth is out. Everyone knows what you are. You've destroyed me. No, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure people knew about it. He looked like he might strike her. But with the entire courtroom watching, with journalists scribbling notes, with his reputation in tatters, he had no power left. You'll regret this, he hissed. Both of you. We'll take that risk. He left, shoulders rigid, his solicitors trailing behind like mourners at a funeral. The crowd pressed forward, women wanting to shake Clara's hand, thank her, tell her their own stories. It was overwhelming, suffocating, wonderful. A young woman grabbed her arm. You gave me courage. I'm leaving my engagement. My fiancé is like the Duke, only wants my inheritance, but I'm not going to let him have it. Are you sure? Clara asked. It's not easy, walking away. I know, but you proved it's possible. That conversation repeated a dozen times in different forms. Women who'd felt trapped, silenced, powerless, all of them seeing Clara as proof that resistance was possible. You've started something, Adrian said as they finally escaped to their carriage. This is bigger than just your case now. Clara looked back at the courthouse, at the crowd still gathered outside. I didn't mean to start anything. I just wanted to survive. Sometimes that's how revolutions begin. One person refusing to submit. The journey back to the estate took 2 days. Clara spent most of it staring out the window, processing everything that had happened. They'd won. Actually won. The Duke was disgraced, his power broken, his reputation destroyed, but the victory felt strange, hollow, almost. Because what had they really won? The right to live without harassment? The freedom to exist without being someone's property? Those shouldn't have been things they had to fight for. You're thinking too hard, Adrian said. I'm thinking about all the women who don't have what I had, who don't have money or resources or the ability to fight back. Clara turned to him. What happens to them? I don't know. But maybe your case opens doors, makes it slightly easier for the next woman who wants to say no. That's not enough. No, but it's something. When they finally arrived at the estate, exhausted and travel-worn, the entire workforce was waiting in the yard. Sarah saw them first, her face breaking into a grin. Well? We won, Clara said simply. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Thomas pushed through the crowd, trying to look gruff and failing completely. Told you you'd do it. You told me I'd fail spectacularly. Yeah, well, I was wrong. Happens occasionally. Inside, someone had prepared a feast, or what passed for a feast with their limited supplies. Bread and cheese and preserved meat, ale that had been hoarded for special occasions. Everyone squeezed into the main hall, talking over each other,
celebrating. Clara stood at the edge, watching. These people, who doubted her, tested her, eventually accepted her, were celebrating her victory like it was their own. Because it was their own. They'd stood with her when it cost them. They'd risked everything by taking her side. "Speech!" someone called out. The crowd took up the chant, "Speech! Speech!" Clara had no idea what to say.
She wasn't good at speeches. But looking at these faces, familiar now, beloved even, she had to try. When I came here, I was running away from a life that wanted to use me up and throw me away. I didn't know how to work. I didn't know how to contribute. I was exactly as useless as Thomas said. Laughter. But you let me stay anyway. You taught me. You pushed me when I wanted to quit. You stood with me when it would have been easier to walk away. Clara's voice thickened. I came here alone, but I'm not alone anymore. And that's worth more than any court victory. Sarah raised her glass. To Lady Clara Hale, who's still terrible with chickens, but decent at everything else. More laughter, more toasts. Adrian found her later, after the celebration had wound down and people had drifted off to bed. You all right? Clara was standing at the window, looking out at the dark sea. I keep thinking about my mother, about my sisters. They're still trapped in that world, following those rules. You can't save everyone, Clara. I know, but I wish I could. Maybe you already did. Maybe some of them will see what you did and realize they have choices too. Or maybe they'll hate me forever for abandoning them. Probably both. Adrian leaned against the window frame beside her. That's the cost of choosing yourself. Some people will understand, others won't. Do you think it was worth it? Do you? Clara thought about the last 4 months, about learning to work with her hands, about earning respect instead of demanding it, about standing in a courtroom and refusing to be silenced, about finding family in unexpected places. Yes, she said. It was worth it. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed everything. The snow melted, revealing fields that needed planting. The estate buzzed with activity, plowing, seeding, repairing winter damage. Clara worked alongside everyone else, her hands permanently calloused now, her body strong from months of labor. The chickens still hated her, but at least she could collect eggs without getting pecked more than twice. Letters continued to arrive from London. Women's groups asking Clara to speak, journalists wanting interviews, progressive politicians using her case to argue for legal reforms. She answered some, ignored others, trying to find balance between being a symbol and being a person. One afternoon, 3 months after the trial, a carriage appeared on the road. Clara watched it approach, her stomach tightening with old anxiety. But when the door opened, it wasn't the Duke or his solicitors. It was her sister, Elizabeth. Clara hadn't seen her in nearly a year. Elizabeth looked older, thinner, her face showing signs of stress. But her eyes, those were the same eyes Clara remembered from childhood, before everything got complicated. Clara. Elizabeth. Clara's voice came out strangled. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, to talk to you. Elizabeth looked around at the estate, at the workers moving in the fields. Can we walk? They walked along the cliffs, the sea crashing below them. Elizabeth didn't speak for a long time, just took in the wild landscape, the rough beauty of it. Finally, she said, Mother told us you were living like a savage, that you'd thrown away everything for pride. Maybe I did. But you look happy, or at least more alive than you ever did in London. Clara glanced at her sister. And you? Are you happy? I was engaged, did you know, to Lord Pembroke's son. Very suitable, very proper. Elizabeth's voice went flat. He broke it off after your scandal, said the family name was too damaged. I'm sorry. Don't be. I was relieved. Clara stopped walking. What? I was relieved, Clara, terrified of what it meant for my future, but relieved I didn't have to marry him. Elizabeth turned to face her. Watching you walk away, it was the most terrifying and inspiring thing I've ever seen. You actually did it. You actually chose yourself. It wasn't easy. No, but it was brave. And it made me realize I didn't want what they were selling either. What are you saying? Elizabeth took a deep breath. I'm saying I need help. I want to leave.
I want to learn to work, to support myself, to be something other than decorative. Her eyes filled with tears. Can I stay here? Please? I know it's a lot to ask after everything, but I don't know where else to go. Clara felt something break open in her chest. Her sister, perfect, obedient Elizabeth, asking for the same freedom Clara had fought for. Of course you can stay. We'll figure it out. Elizabeth hugged her, hard and desperate. Thank you. Thank you. That night, Clara introduced Elizabeth to the others. Sarah showed her where she'd be sleeping. Thomas explained the work schedule. Adrian welcomed her with the same calm acceptance he'd shown Clara. How long do you think she'll last? Sarah asked quietly, watching Elizabeth try to make sense of the chicken coop. I don't know, but she's here. That's a start. 3 weeks later, Margaret arrived, Clara's other sister. Then a cousin. Then 2 women from London who'd read about the trial and wanted to escape similar situations. The estate was becoming something Clara hadn't planned. A refuge. A place where women who didn't fit the mold could learn to build different lives. We can't keep taking people in, Thomas argued during a planning meeting. We don't have resources for... Then we find more resources, Clara interrupted. We expand, we build. With what money? I have an idea about that.
Buckle part sorted.
Clara's idea was simple but radical. Turn the estate into a working farm run entirely by women. Produce goods, sell them in markets. Create an economic model that didn't depend on traditional power structures. That's insane, Thomas said. Everything I've done has been insane. This is just the latest version. It took 6 months to implement. 6 months of backbreaking work, failed experiments, and learning from mistakes. But slowly, it started working. They produced cheese, preserved fruits, woven goods. Sarah discovered she had a talent for organization and started managing sales. Elizabeth, surprisingly, turned out to be brilliant with numbers and took over the accounts. The estate stopped being a burden and became sustainable. More than sustainable. Profitable. You've built something remarkable here, Adrian said one evening, looking over the ledgers. We built it, Clara corrected, all of us. Still, it's remarkable. They were sitting in what had become her office, a small room overlooking the fields. The marriage between them was still unconsummated, still a legal arrangement rather than a romantic one. But somewhere along the way, Adrian had become her closest friend, her partner in every meaningful sense. Do you regret it? Clara asked suddenly. Marrying me? Tying yourself to all of this? Adrian was quiet for a moment. I regret that we had to do it under pressure. I regret that society made it necessary, but regret the outcome? No. Even though we're not really married? Not in the traditional sense? Clara, we run an estate together. We make decisions together. We've built something neither of us could have built alone. That's more of a marriage than most people ever have. He paused. And if you ever want more than that, or less, or something different, we'll figure it out, like we always do. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you for all of this, for seeing me when no one else did. You're easy to see when you stop trying to disappear. A year after the trial, Clara received an invitation to speak at a women's rights gathering in London. The organizers wanted her to share her story, to inspire other women to demand better. She almost declined. London held too many memories, too much pain, but Elizabeth convinced her. You started something. People need to hear from you. So Clara went, Adrian and Elizabeth traveling with her. The venue was packed. Hundreds of women crowded into a hall designed for half that number. Clara stood backstage, her palms sweating, her heart racing. I'm not good at public speaking, she told the organizer. You're good at truth-telling. That's better. When Clara walked on stage, the applause was deafening. She stood at the podium, looking out at all those faces, young and old, wealthy and poor, all of them waiting to hear what she had to say. She took a breath and began. I was raised to be sold. That's not metaphor. That's fact. My entire childhood was preparation for the moment when my father would trade me to the highest bidder in exchange for social advancement. Her voice carried across the hall. And I accepted it. For 22 years, I believed that was my purpose, that my wants, my dreams, my very self didn't matter compared to my family's ambitions. The room was silent, every eye on her. Then I overheard the truth. I heard my fiancé discuss me like livestock, I heard my cousin laugh about my ignorance, and I realized that no one in that world saw me as human. I was property. Valuable, yes, but only for what I could provide. Clara gripped the podium. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done. I destroyed my family's reputation. I ruined my sister's prospects. I caused my father's death, according to some. And for a long time, I carried that guilt like a stone. But here's what I learned. That guilt was another cage, another way of keeping me compliant. Because if women believe we're responsible for every consequence of our choices, we'll never choose ourselves. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The Duke tried to destroy me for refusing him. He used his power, his money, his influence, everything the system gives to men like him. And he failed. Not because I'm special or particularly brave, but because I had help, because other women stood with me, because enough people decided the truth mattered more than maintaining a comfortable lie. Clara looked out at the audience. So here's what I want to say to every woman in this room. You are not property. You are not an investment. You are not decoration for someone else's life. You are human, with wants and needs and rights that matter. And if the system tells you otherwise, change the system. The applause started like rain, then built to thunder. Women stood, shouting agreement, some crying, all of them transformed by the simple permission to want more. Clara left the stage shaking, but not from fear, from the weight of possibility. These women, all of them, were ready to fight, ready to demand better, ready to break the cages they'd been born into. And maybe, just maybe, that would be her real legacy. Not surviving the Duke, not winning the trial, but showing other women that survival was possible, that freedom, though costly, was worth the price. They stayed in London for 3 days, meeting with advocacy groups, discussing reforms, laying groundwork for changes that would take years to implement. On the last night, Clara walked past her family's townhouse in Grosvenor Square. It looked the same iron railings, same perfect facade, same suffocating order. But Clara was different. She stood there for a long time, remembering the girl who'd lived inside those walls, the girl who'd been so carefully trained, so perfectly compliant, so utterly miserable without even knowing it. You all right? Adrian appeared beside her. Just saying goodbye. To what? To who I used to be. To the life I didn't choose. They walked away together, back to the hotel where Elizabeth was waiting, back to the life they were building. The journey back to the estate felt different this time, not like running away, but like going home. When they crested this final hill and Clara saw the house, weathered stone, smoke rising from chimneys, fields green with new growth, she felt something settle inside her. This was hers. Not given to her, not assigned to her, but built by her own hands and choices. The workers were in the fields when they arrived. Sarah waved from the garden. Thomas shouted something about a broken fence that needed attention. Margaret, the former maid who testified, was teaching new arrivals how to milk cows. It was chaotic and imperfect, and absolutely nothing like the ordered world Clara had left behind. It was perfect. That night, as the sun set over the sea, Clara stood on the cliffs with Adrian beside her. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gone through with the wedding? He asked. Sometimes, but I think I know. I would have survived. That's what I'm good at. But I wouldn't have lived. And now? Clara looked out at the wild coast, at the house full of women learning to choose themselves, at the life she'd built from nothing but determination and refusal to submit. Now I'm living. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of salt and possibility. Clara closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. She'd lost her family name, lost her inheritance, lost the life she was supposed to have, but she'd gained something infinitely more valuable, herself. And standing there on the edge of the world, with the sea crashing below and the sky opening up above, Clara Hale, the woman who'd been sold, who'd run, who'd fought and survived and ultimately won, finally understood what freedom meant. It meant choosing, every day, to be exactly who you were. It meant refusing to disappear. It meant standing on cliff tops and daring the world to push you off. It meant living, really living, on your own terms. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting everything gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more work, more struggle, more battles to fight. But tonight, standing beside someone who'd chosen to stand with her, surrounded by women who'd found courage in her example, looking out at a future she'd built with her own hands, Clara was free. And that freedom, hard-won and fierce and absolutely hers, was worth every sacrifice she'd made to claim it. The wind howled, the sea raged, the night descended, and Clara Hale stood her ground, unbreakable, unbowed, finally herself.